Rich MOM pushes black girl off the stage. Then the judge demands she returns. The stage lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow, casting a warm hue over the hardwood floor of the Millstone Academy's grand auditorium, where velvet curtains hung like the gates of opportunity themselves, heavy and silent, waiting to be drawn open for the night's annual talent showcase. The rows of seats, soon to be filled by parents, teachers, and a local celebrity judge, gleamed under the soft house lights, and backstage, the air buzzed with the frantic energy of last-minute rehearsals, whispered encouragements, and nerves so taut they could be heard humming just beneath the surface. In the far corner of the backstage wing stood Amira Langston, a 14-year-old girl with deep brown skin, eyes full of focus, and long, neatly braided hair tied with a crimson ribbon that matched her modest silk dress. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched the thin microphone in her hand, not from fear of the performance itself, but from the weight of what it meant. Millstone Academy was one of the most prestigious private schools in the region, and Amira, the daughter of a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse, had earned her place through relentless academic work and an audition that brought the music director to tears. She was the only black girl in her grade, the only scholarship student on the stage tonight. Across the room, standing with perfect posture in a designer gown that shimmered like pale glass under the dressing room light, was Harper Whitmore, daughter of Judith Whitmore, board member, donor, and social royalty in town. Harper's platinum blonde curls bounced with each dramatic sigh as her vocal coach adjusted her necklace, and her soft soprano voice floated through the air as she hummed a few bars from her upcoming performance. The two girls had barely spoken during their time at the academy, not because of any overt rudeness from Harper, at least not initially, but because, to her, Amira simply didn't exist in the same orbit. It had started with small things, dismissive glances, being talked over in class, a whispered joke Amira wasn't supposed to hear. Well, of course she got in. They need diversity, right? But tonight, it was no longer just background tension. Tonight was the showdown. The order of performers had been set weeks in advance, and Amira was scheduled third, with Harper following immediately after. It hadn't mattered to Amira until she heard, through hushed conversation in the hallway earlier that day, that Judith had attempted to pull strings to have Harper moved up to perform before Amira. "She deserves to open strong," Judith had said in a voicemail to the principal that had somehow made its way into the students' group chat. "We can't have her follow. That girl." The last two words were whispered, but unmistakable. But Principal McGrady, a woman known for being unmovable when it came to rules, had refused. The order stayed. Amira would sing first. When the moment finally came, and Amira stepped into the spotlight, the auditorium seemed to fall into a hush that was deeper than silence. Her voice, rich and clear, filled the air like warm honey poured over winter winds. She sang not only with technical grace, but with something Harper could never replicate: soul, heart. Every note carried a piece of her story, of her mother's sacrifices, of the nights studying under flickering lamps, of wanting to prove she wasn't just a box checked for someone's brochure. The applause was thunderous. People stood. A few gasped. Even the judge, a Broadway producer in a pressed navy suit, was seen nodding with misted eyes. Amira curtsied with humility, then stepped to the side as Harper took the stage with her eyes narrowed like slits. What happened next wasn't an accident. As Amira began to walk down the small side steps, Harper, climbing up from the opposite side, stumbled. But her hand didn't reach for the rail. It reached toward Amira's shoulder with force, just enough to send her teetering backward. The world tilted. Gasps filled the room. Amira's arms flailed for a second before she landed with a muffled thud and a cry of pain on the edge of the curtain wall. Her dress tore slightly, and her microphone rolled across the floor like a forgotten truth. From the stage, Harper blinked down at her with mock surprise. "Oh my God," she said flatly, feigning shock. "I didn't even see her there." People began to murmur. Principal McGrady rushed down the aisle. Amira sat up, her elbow scraped and her pride bruised far worse. The judge stood. Judith Whitmore, seated in the front row with a camera raised and no shame on her face, called out, "Harper, sweetheart, just begin. Accidents happen." But the judge didn't sit. His voice rang out sharp and commanding, slicing through the static of the scene. "No, this performance is paused." Judith narrowed her eyes. "I beg your pardon?" she asked. "I said, it's paused," he repeated. "That girl," he pointed to Amira, "deserves to finish what she started, and I want everyone to see it." Harper's lips parted, but no sound came out. Amira slowly stood, her fingers trembling once more, but this time not with fear. To be continued. The auditorium buzzed for hours after the incident, whispers spreading like wildfire down the varnished wooden aisles, swirling around the velvet curtains, bouncing off the acoustic panels that had once held only the echoes of performances and applause. Now they held something heavier, something raw. And Amara, curled in her mother's car, trembling beneath the long folds of her satin recital dress, had no words for what that was. Only the dull sting in her knee, the heat behind her eyes, and the heaviness in her chest that she hadn't yet learned to name. Her mother, Tanisha, drove in silence at first, jaw clenched, hands white-knuckling the wheel of their old silver Camry as the city lights blurred past them. But eventually the dam inside her broke. "She put her hands on you," Tanisha said through gritted teeth, her voice low but vibrating with fury. That woman thought she had the right to lay hands on my child, in front of a crowd full of people, and no one did a thing." Amara flinched, not from her mother's words, but from the memory. "She looked at me like I wasn't even supposed to be up there," Amara whispered, "like I wasn't worthy." Tanisha's eyes darted to her daughter for a moment, and then back to the road. "You were the only one who actually deserved to be up there." Backstage, before it all went wrong, Amara had stood behind the curtains with her head held high, her back straight, the song she'd practiced for 3 months playing like a lullaby in her mind. Her voice coach, Mr. Dean, had called her a prodigy, and even that word had felt too small. Her voice wasn't just beautiful, it was truthful. When she sang, even the air seemed to lean in to listen. But Felicity, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, wrapped in rhinestones and entitlement, had never liked the way Amara drew the spotlight. And her mother, Brielle Whitmore, had liked it even less. The push, caught on at least 3 phones, had been swift and shameless. A hand to the shoulder, a forceful shove, a gasp from the crowd as Amara's foot slipped and she hit the wooden stage with a dull thud. The microphone clattered to the floor. Her dreams shattered just beside it. The next morning, the video was everywhere. Not just in parent group chats, not just in the school's private network, but on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, gaining traction with hashtags like #JusticeForAmara, #StageShove, and #PushOfPrivilege. Some comments were kind, others less so, but the attention was undeniable. And so was the silence from the school. "I called Principal Halloway's office 3 times this morning," Tanisha said over breakfast. "No response. Left 2 voicemails. Sent an email. You know what they sent back?" Amara, still in her pajamas, looked up from her untouched bowl of oatmeal. "A newsletter. A newsletter, Amara. About the spring bake sale." Amara blinked. "They're pretending it didn't happen. They're hoping it blows over," Tanisha replied, folding her arms tightly. "But I promise you, baby, we are not going to let it." 2 days later, Tanisha sat across from an attorney named Patrice Wynn. a sharp-witted black woman in a tailored navy blue suit who had graduated from Howard Law and taken down more than a few Goliaths in her time. The moment she saw the video, her lips tightened, and her hand balled into a fist on the desk. "She assaulted a minor," Patrice said simply, watching the clip a second time. "And the school didn't intervene, didn't call, didn't report, didn't acknowledge. That's not just negligence. That's complicity." "But will it go anywhere?" Tanisha asked, her voice cautious. "You know how it goes. They'll spin it, say she tripped, that it wasn't intentional, that Brielle was just trying to fix her dress or something. She shoved her." Patrice's voice was ice. "In front of 200 people. We have witnesses. And more importantly, your daughter was supposed to sing. She was next. They knew it. Everyone knew it. And they let her get pushed aside, literally and metaphorically, because some rich mother decided her daughter's feelings mattered more than fairness." Tanisha exhaled, slowly. "So what do? We file a civil suit against Brielle Whitmore for assault, and against the school for failing to protect a student during a sanctioned event. And we don't stop there, we call the press. We put it on record, because if we don't, they'll bury it under cupcakes and choral fundraisers." By the end of the week, the story had made the local news. By the end of the second, it was on national morning shows. And by the end of the third, Brielle Whitmore, once a fixture at the country club and school board meetings, was facing civil charges and very public disgrace. What no one expected, however, was that a judge in juvenile court would make a rare move. She issued an order not just for restitution but for restoration. She summoned the school. She summoned Brielle. She summoned the board. And she made one simple demand. "Miss Amara Fields will return to that stage," the judge declared. "And she will sing her piece, with the lights on, with a full audience, and with every person who once looked away sitting in the front row." And just like that, the stage that had once seen injustice was ordered to become a platform for healing. But Amara wasn't sure she wanted to go back. For a long moment, silence thickened the auditorium like fog, blanketing every heart with disbelief. Tiana stood backstage, her small fists trembling at her sides, her lip caught between her teeth, while her mother knelt in front of her, brushing invisible dust from her daughter's dress, as if by doing so she could erase the shame that had just been publicly heaped upon them both. The glow of the stage lights bled out into the wings, but none of that warmth seemed to reach them anymore. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chamberlain strutted off the stage with her daughter, Genevieve, trailing behind, a nervous glance cast backward every few seconds. She wasn't sure if she was afraid of what had happened or ashamed of what her mother had done. The two disappeared through the side exit, but the tension they left behind hung heavy in the air, impossible to dismiss. The auditorium was still buzzing. Teachers whispered. Students whispered louder. Parents, especially the black parents sitting in the back rows, were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some already rising, voices raised in protest. But before anything else could unfold, a tall, composed woman in a sleek navy blue pantsuit rose from her chair at the judge's table. She was older, maybe in her early 60s, with tightly coiled silver-gray hair pulled back into a bun and wire-framed glasses that had slid ever so slightly down her nose. Her name was Judge Clarice Rowland, retired from the federal bench but known throughout the tri-state area for her unshakable sense of fairness and her absolute refusal to be intimidated by power or privilege. She walked to the center of the stage without a microphone, and yet her voice somehow filled the entire hall like a storm-gathering force. "Everyone, I will not permit this to continue. We are better than this. This is not what this showcase is meant to represent. This is not the community I believe in." The murmurs dimmed. She turned her gaze to the wings. Tiana. Tiana looked up, her eyes still wet, her shoulders still trembling. Yes, ma'am, she whispered. Would you please return to the stage? Judge Rowland's tone softened, but her words were firm, like iron wrapped in velvet. You were about to perform, and this entire auditorium, including this panel, still wants to see you do just that. If you are willing. Mrs. Freeman hesitated. Do you have to, baby? We can go home. Tiana straightened her back. No, Mama. I want to sing. The audience erupted in soft applause, spontaneous, almost reverent. A few people stood. Some wiped away tears. Tiana stepped forward, her tiny shoes tapping the floor like the drums of a battle. She didn't know she was already winning. She walked out, chin high, and stopped center stage. The same piano stood ready, the bench untouched. Judge Rowland smiled and nodded to the accompanist. Begin when you're ready. The music floated out once more, gentle, almost trembling at first. Then came Tiana's voice, uncertain for just a heartbeat, and then strong, bell-like, full of the kind of honesty that made every adult in the room remember what it meant to feel something real. She sang not like someone who had been pushed aside, but like someone who had returned to claim what was already hers. The moment she hit the high note, clear, unwavering, and long, something strange happened. One by one, people in the audience rose to their feet. Not at the end. Not waiting for applause cues. They stood as if the act of witnessing her voice was a privilege in itself. Mrs. Chamberlain, who had slipped back into the auditorium, watched from the shadows at the far edge of the room, her arms crossed, her eyes flickering between coldness and something else, something closer to doubt. And beside her, Genevieve whispered, "She's better than me." The older woman didn't respond. When the song ended, the auditorium exploded in applause, an ovation that echoed across the room like thunder in the springtime. Some were cheering. Others were sobbing. Judge Rowland approached again and took the microphone this time, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, that was courage, that was grace, and that was art." She turned to the other judges. I believe we all saw the same thing. Another judge, a young man in a blazer and tortoiseshell glasses, nodded, without question. But then, before the audience could begin to settle, Judge Rowland said something no one expected. We will be adjusting today's results, in light of the disruption and reviewing conduct. And Mrs. Chamberlain, she said, her eyes scanning the shadows, you will not be allowed to leave this auditorium without a formal conversation. I will be filing a report. A ripple of murmurs, some gasps, but Tiana didn't even flinch. She stepped down from the stage, straight into her mother's arms, the applause still echoing behind them. This time, it wasn't just a performance, it was a reclaiming of space, of dignity, of power, and that everyone knew was just the beginning. The silence that fell across the theater after Judge Evelyn Harrow's command was like a glass wall shattering across the room. Some gasped audibly. Others turned to each other, eyes wide, murmuring, "Did she just say that?" But Evelyn didn't waver. Her voice, deep and deliberate, carried through the air with an authority that silenced even the whispers. "Amira Jefferson," she repeated, this time slower, with the weight of the moment behind every syllable. "Come back to the stage." At the back of the room, where Amira stood frozen in place near the exit, the velvet curtain barely brushing her arm, her heart thundered against her ribs. Her mother, Justine, stood beside her, stunned into silence, as if the ground beneath them had tilted and nothing felt real anymore. It wasn't just shock. It was the slow realization that something had shifted, fundamentally, irreversibly. The girl who had been publicly humiliated, shoved from the stage as if she didn't belong in that world of lights and promise, was now being summoned back by the judge herself in front of every parent, every student, and every sponsor. Chloe Vancroft, still standing center stage with perfect posture and trembling hands, looked toward her mother, who sat in the second row with her lips tight and face pale. Marissa Vancroft had gone utterly still, her pearl earrings swaying slightly as if the tremors of the moment affected even them. Amira's chest heaved as she turned toward her mother. "Mama, should I?" Justine wiped a single tear from her cheek and nodded. "Baby, this is your moment. You earned that stage. Go take it." Slowly, Amira stepped forward, each footfall echoing through the hushed auditorium. Students moved aside, forming a quiet path for her, their expressions ranging from guilt to awe to something like shame. The very people who had watched her fall, some with smirks, others with indifference, now watched her rise again, one steady step at a time. When she reached the stage, Judge Harrow extended a hand. "I've sat through 100 of these competitions," she said, addressing the entire audience now, "and I have never in my career witnessed such a blatant act of elitism and cruelty, cloaked in excuses and privilege, as I did today." Miss Vancroft's mother overstepped every boundary, both moral and professional, and yet none of us stopped it. "Not until now. That ends today." Marissa's voice rang out, sharp and brittle. "You don't understand, Judge. This is about decorum, standards. That girl came in here looking like—" Evelyn raised her hand, silencing her. "Say one more word, Mrs. Vancroft," she said, "and you'll be escorted out." The audience held its breath. Judge Harrow turned to Amira. "Now, young lady, we're going to do something different. You're going to stand on this stage, exactly where you were before you were interrupted. And this time, every eye in this room will watch you, not to mock, not to judge, but to see what excellence looks like when it's been forged under pressure." Amira's throat tightened. She looked down for a moment, fingers trembling against the microphone, before finally lifting her gaze to the audience. "I never thought I'd have to perform twice in one day," she said with a soft laugh, her voice steady despite everything. "But maybe the second time's the one that really counts." She took her breath, centered herself, and began. Her spoken word piece poured from her like something ancient and powerful, weaving a story about a little black girl who grew up believing stages weren't meant for her, who was taught to be quiet in the spaces built by others, and who found her voice the moment someone tried to silence it. Her words soared, vivid, melodic, heartbreaking, and hopeful. She spoke of velvet ropes, of side doors and back rows, of being mistaken for a helper when she was the star, of being told to wait her turn while others skipped the line, and of the fire that refused to be put out. The crowd was silent not because they were disinterested, but because they were completely, breathlessly captivated. By the end, some were wiping their eyes. Others stood. Then more. A slow-building standing ovation roared across the auditorium like a wave crashing through resistance. Amira stood still as it washed over her. Her hands, once trembling, now rested calmly by her sides. Her eyes locked on Chloe's, and for the first time, Chloe didn't look back with condescension or pity, only something like awe. Behind the judge's bench, Evelyn nodded to the organizers. "The original scores have been thrown out," she announced. "We will have a new deliberation. But one thing is already certain: Amira Jefferson belongs on this stage. And I, for one, believe we just witnessed the winning performance." A murmur of agreement rose from the audience. Backstage, Marissa Vancroft stormed toward the exit, phone clutched in her hand, face red with fury. Chloe hesitated, then turned away from her mother and headed toward the green room instead. She didn't want to follow that kind of power anymore. Final part. Напишу деталізовані промпт для прев'ю для це стор. Прев'ю мабуть цепляючим, на ньому мабуть конфлікт. Щоб це зацепило глядача, ВН заход вклацнути на прев'ю. Тема расизм, дискримінація. Також створи для кожної частини максимально деталізований промпт для картинки. Тобто картинок має бути 5 штук. Має бути 5 деталізованих промптів. Прописуй промпти так, щоб в них лиця були схожі між собою. Персонаж мають бути описан однаково в кожному промпт. Характеристики персонажа мають бути прописані максимально детально в кожному промпт.